Hail hammered down on the streets of Chicago like thousands of silver bullets. Each pellet of frozen water felt like a reminder of just how ruthless and cold this world could be. Cassandra Monroe pressed her back against the brick wall of a weather-worn apartment building, one hand clutching her thin coat tight as the November storm tried to tear it from her narrow shoulders. Her clothes were soaked through from the walk home from the bar. Her auburn-brown hair lay plastered to her pale face, and her legs ached inside shoes that were held together by nothing but hope and tape. She was just about to push the door open and step inside when she heard it. A small, raspy, brittle cough, as if death itself were trying to crawl out from a child's chest. Cassie turned slowly, rain and hail streaming down her face, and she saw them in an alley as black as ink. A man knelt, collapsed on the ground, his expensive suit torn and dark with blood at the shoulder, both arms wrapped tight around a little girl who looked no older than 5. The child's lips were turning blue, the kind of blue that made Cassie's heart seem to stop from fear. That tiny body trembled with every coughing fit, convulsing as she struggled for air. The man lifted his head to Cassie. His eyes were gray and cold as steel, yet inside them was a terror she had never seen before. Not the fear of someone weak, but the fear of a father watching his child die in his arms while the whole world walked past. "Please," he choked out, his voice raw and hoarse with pain and desperation. "Please, help us. My daughter, she can't breathe. Do not call the police. Do not call an ambulance. They will kill her." "I don't know what else to do." Cassie did not hesitate. She had $47 in her wallet, one box of instant noodles in her apartment, and rent due in 4 days. She herself was one step away from homelessness. She did not know who this man was, why he was hurt, why he was afraid of the police, but she looked at that little girl, at those blue lips, at the wet curls of black hair, at the thin wheeze threaded through her desperate coughing, and she understood that none of those questions mattered anymore. Kindness does not do math. Compassion does not check a bank account before it arrives. "Come with me," Cassie said, her voice strangely steady even as she was already moving toward the door. "My apartment is on the 3rd floor. Right now. Hurry." She did not know that the man she had just decided to save was Vincent Moretti, the Mafia boss who controlled half the city of Chicago. She also did not know that that split-second decision would change her life forever. Do you believe in love between darkness and light? Please like and share this story with those who need the reminder that kindness still exists. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the deeply emotional journey ahead. Cassie steadied the stranger through the battered old door, and every step he took was heavy, unsteady, as if his legs no longer fully belonged to him. The little girl in his arms kept coughing without pause, that dry, scraping sound echoing through the pitch-dark stairwell like a plea for help from another world. 3 flights of stairs had never felt so long. The rotting wooden steps groaned under the weight of 3 bodies, and Cassie could hear the man's broken breathing beside her, could see the dark red smear of blood he left along the stair rail. She did not ask. She only kept moving, kept holding him up, kept getting them to the only safe place she could think of. Her apartment sat at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway, its blue-painted door flaked away in large peeling patches. Cassie unlocked it with hands trembling from the cold and pushed it open, revealing the space inside. The room was so small you could touch all 4 walls if you stood in the middle. A narrow single bed with old but clean sheets was wedged into the corner. A sofa, torn in more than one place, was covered with a worn blanket. A tiny kitchen nook held a single-burner hot plate and a mini fridge that hummed and rattled with noise. The bathroom was only big enough for one person to stand, and the door could not shut all the way. There was nothing of value in this apartment. No decorations, no family photos, no signs of comfort or prosperity or happiness. Only the clean, careful order of someone who had lived with poverty for far too long. But the room was warm, and right now, that warmth was worth more than any palace in the world. "Put her on the bed," Cassie ordered, her voice shifting into action. She did not have time to worry or to be afraid. She only had time to do. Vincent hesitated for a heartbeat, his gray eyes sweeping the room as if measuring every possible threat. The instincts of a man who had lived in the dark too long would not let him trust anyone, would not let him loosen his guard for even a second. But then he looked down at Sophia, at the blue tint on his daughter's lips, and he knew he had no choice left. He set the little girl onto the single bed, his large hands trembling as he brushed back her wet black curls. Cassie had already rushed into the bathroom and returned with a clean towel and a basin of warm water. She sat beside the bed and began to wipe Sophia down, stripping away the soaked clothing and replacing it with one of her own old t-shirts. It hung far too large on the child's small frame, but at least it was dry and clean. She pressed a hand to Sophia's forehead, feeling the heat flare into her palm. The girl had a high fever, very high. Cassie rummaged through a small drawer where she kept only the most essential things and found the fever medicine she saved for emergencies. She measured the right dose for a 5-year-old, gently lifted Sophia's head, and tipped the medicine into the child's mouth. Sophia swallowed weakly, her eyes still tightly shut. "Now you," Cassie said, turning to Vincent. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, one hand clamped over his injured shoulder. Blood had soaked through the expensive fabric of his suit, spreading in a dark, mottled stain. "I'm fine," Vincent said, his voice cold and distant. He was not used to being cared for. He was not used to having to rely on anyone. Cassie looked at him, her pale green eyes holding no fear. "You were shot. That is not fine. Take your shirt off so I can see the wound." Vincent wanted to refuse, wanted to say he could handle it himself. But something in the way this woman looked at him made him fall silent. Not pity, not curiosity, only pure concern, unconditional, without calculation. Slowly, he took off his suit jacket, then his dress shirt. The wound was exposed, a bullet hole through the soft part of his shoulder, blood still seeping out in a steady, slow leak. Cassie did not scream. She did not panic. She only frowned, stood, and brought back more clean towels, warm water, and a bottle of rubbing alcohol she had bought at a discount store. "This is going to hurt," she warned. Then she began to clean the wound. Vincent clenched his jaw and endured it without letting a sound escape. He was used to pain, but he was not used to the gentleness in Cassie's hands, to the way she was careful not to hurt him more than she had to. In Vincent Moretti's world, everything had a price. Every action had a motive. But this woman, she was giving without asking for anything in return, and that confused him more than any enemy he had ever faced. The bullet was still lodged in his shoulder. Cassie knew it the moment she saw the entry wound, with no exit wound, knew that if it stayed there, infection would set in, and everything would become twice as bad. She rose and went to the small kitchen drawer and gathered what she had. A pair of metal tweezers, a small knife, a roll of gauze tape bought from a discount store, and the cheap bottle of whiskey someone had left behind at the bar, the one she had brought home a few weeks ago. She poured whiskey over the tweezers and the knife, disinfecting them the only way she knew how. Vincent watched her work in silence, his gray eyes never leaving her hands. She was not a professional. She had no training, but she was calm and decisive. And in this moment, that was everything he needed. "This will hurt," Cassie said, her voice gentle but firm. "I do not have any anesthetic." "Do it," Vincent replied, without a flicker of hesitation. Cassie knelt beside him, knife in one hand, tweezers in the other. She drew a deep breath, then began. The blade cut into skin and flesh, widening the wound so she could see the bullet buried deep inside. Vincent clenched his teeth, his jaw tightening, cords standing out in his neck. But he did not make a sound, did not flinch even once. He stared straight at the wall in front of him, focusing on mastering the pain instead of letting it master him. Cassie slid the tweezers into the wound, searching for the small piece of metal lodged in his body. She felt it, cold and hard within the soft tissue, and she clamped down, pulling slowly. The bullet came free of Vincent's shoulder with a faint, hissing sound, followed by a sudden stream of bright red blood. Cassie quickly poured whiskey over the wound. Vincent let out a single sharp hiss through clenched teeth. Then she pressed gauze against it and began to wrap and secure the bandage. Her hands moved fast, steady, as if she had done this all her life. But in truth, this was the first time she had ever pulled a bullet from someone's body. She was only doing what she believed was right, and praying it would be enough. "All done," she murmured, tying the final knot in the bandage. "You will be fine, as long as it does not get infected." Vincent looked down at his shoulder, then up at Cassie. "You saved my life," he said, his voice strange, as if he did not know how to respond to that. "I just took a bullet out of your shoulder," Cassie answered, rising to wash her hands. "Do not dramatize everything." Before Vincent could say anything else, a sound from the bed made them both turn. Sophia was whimpering, her small body twisting on the sheets. Her cracked, dry lips moved, shaping a single word. "Daddy, Daddy." Vincent lunged to his daughter so fast Cassie almost could not see him move. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his large hand closing around Sophia's tiny one, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Daddy is here. Daddy is here, sweetheart. Daddy's good girl." Sophia did not open her eyes. She was delirious. The fever had burned away her awareness and pulled her into a place between waking and dreaming. She kept calling for Daddy. She kept twisting and trembling. She kept coughing those terrifying, dry coughs. Cassie moved at once. She brought more wet cloths, replacing them again and again to keep a cool compress on Sophia's forehead. She mixed warm water with a little salt and coaxed the child to drink small sips to keep her from dehydrating. She checked the temperature by laying her hand against Sophia's brow, and every time she did, her heart tightened at the heat pouring off that small body. The night dragged on in tension and dread. Outside the window, the storm still howled. Hail still lashed the glass like the bony fingers of death trying to reclaim its prey. But inside this tiny apartment, 2 adults fought death with wet cloths and salt water, with patience and fierce determination. Cassie and Vincent took turns caring for Sophia, yet neither of them truly rested. They sat on either side of the narrow bed, eyes fixed on the little girl, ears straining for every ragged breath. Around 3 a.m, when Sophia spiked with fever again and began to shiver violently, Cassie and Vincent both reached for the wet cloth at the same time. Their hands touched. Both of them froze. It was only a brief moment, perhaps not even a full second, but in that moment, something shifted. Cassie felt the strength in his hand, and she also felt the tremor of a father terrified of losing his child. Vincent felt the warmth in her hand, the gentleness of someone who gives without demanding anything. They did not speak. They only held each other's gaze for an instant, then turned back to Sophia as if nothing had happened. But they both knew something had begun. An invisible thread had been drawn between 2 unfamiliar hearts. And in that long, sleepless night, between the child's coughing and the hail striking the window, that thread began to pull tighter. The first light of the new day slipped through the worn curtain, painting pale golden streaks across the wooden floor. The storm had eased at some point, leaving only a soft, steady drizzle outside the window, like a lullaby that arrived too late. Cassie sat with her back against the wall, head tilted to one side, eyes shut in the shallow, drifting sleep of exhaustion. She had not truly slept all night. She had only managed a few minutes at a time, then startled awake again at the sound of Sophia's coughing. Vincent sat on the other side of the bed, his back against the frame, one hand still holding his daughter's hand. He had not slept either. He did not dare. He simply sat there, guarding every breath Sophia took, counting each heartbeat beneath her fragile skin, as if that were the only way to keep his little girl with him. Then Sophia stirred. Her long lashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. The gray eyes, identical to her father's, looked up at the unfamiliar ceiling, then drifted to the side. And when she saw Vincent, she whispered a single weak word, "Daddy." Vincent felt as if someone had lifted an enormous stone off his chest. He bent down, pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead, and this time he did not feel the burning heat he had felt last night. The fever had broken. His daughter would be all right. "Do you feel better, my little princess?" he asked, his voice rough from a night without sleep and without speaking. Sophia nodded faintly, but then her gaze shifted and stopped on Cassie, still slumped asleep against the wall. The child drew back, tucking herself closer to her father, her eyes sharp with fear and caution. "Daddy, who is she?" Sophia whispered, her small voice trembling. Vincent followed his daughter's gaze, looking at the woman asleep so deeply she did not know she had become the subject of the conversation. Her auburn hair was a tangled mess. Her clothes were still damp from last night. Her face was pale from lack of sleep. Yet even in that exhausted state, there was something about her that Vincent could not look away from. "That is Cassie," he explained gently. "She saved us last night. She is a good person. You do not need to be afraid." Sophia did not fully trust that yet, but she was no longer trembling. She simply lay there, watching the unfamiliar woman with the wary curiosity of a child who had learned too young to be cautious around strangers. Cassie chose that moment to wake. She jolted, eyes wide, and it took her a few seconds to remember where she was and what had happened. Then she saw Sophia watching her, and her face softened at once. "Good morning, little angel," she said, her voice warm and gentle, as if she were speaking to a frightened sparrow. "How are you feeling?" Sophia did not answer. She only pressed deeper into her father's arms. But Cassie did not seem offended. She simply smiled, patient and understanding, then stood and walked toward the kitchen. She gave the little girl time. She did not force her. She did not demand trust she had not yet earned. Vincent watched Cassie move around the small apartment, pour water, and mix a cup of warm milk from a box of powdered milk that was nearly empty in the cupboard. She carried the cup to the bed, knelt to bring herself level with Sophia's eyes, and spoke in the gentlest voice she had. "This is warm milk. Drink a little. It will help you feel better. You do not have to be afraid of me. I only want to help you." Sophia looked at the cup, then at Cassie, then at her father as if asking permission. Vincent nodded encouragement, and only then did the child reach out, timidly taking the cup. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, her voice as small as breath. Vincent's heart tightened as if someone had wrapped a fist around it. He watched Cassie with his daughter, watched the patience and tenderness in every small gesture, and he could not stop himself from thinking of Isabella. His wife had been like that once, gentle, patient, always knowing how to make Sophia feel safe. But Isabella had been gone for 3 years, and since then, Sophia had not had anyone treat her that way again. Until last night, until this woman. Cassie stood, glanced at the wall clock that was half broken. She let out a sigh, then began searching for her uniform. "I have to go to work," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "My morning shift starts at 6. "How are you going to work?" Vincent asked, his voice unable to hide his surprise. "You have been up all night. You are exhausted." Cassie turned to look at him, a tired smile on her lips, but not a bitter one. "I am always exhausted. That is normal. But if I do not go to work, I do not have money. If I do not have money, I do not have a place to live. It is simple." She disappeared into the bathroom, and Vincent sat there watching the door close, feeling something strange rise in his chest. It was admiration. And maybe it was something deeper than that. The door closed behind Cassie, and the tiny apartment suddenly became so quiet it felt suffocating. Vincent sat beside Sophia's bed, watching his daughter drift deeper into peaceful sleep, and for the first time since last night, he allowed himself to let out a long breath. He slipped a hand into his pocket and pulled out the phone he had kept powered off for 12 hours. When the screen lit up, dozens of missed calls and messages appeared, all from the same name, Nico. Vincent glanced at Sophia once more, making sure she was still sleeping soundly. Then he moved to the farthest corner of the apartment and pressed call. Nico picked up after the first ring. "Boss," the familiar voice came through, heavy with worry and relief at the same time. "Oh my God, you're alive. We've been looking for you everywhere." "I'm fine," Vincent said, his voice low and worn. "Sophia is fine too. We're somewhere safe." "Where?" "I'll send people right now." "No," Vincent cut him off. "Not yet. I need to know what happened." How did Tony Caruso know which school Sophia was at? How did he get past the security team? There was a long silence on the other end. Then Nico exhaled, his voice weighted down. "There's a rat, boss. Inside our organization. We're still investigating, but it looks like someone sold information to Caruso." Vincent's memory dragged him back to the night before, to the moment his life had nearly collapsed completely. He had been in his office when the call came in. Tony Caruso's voice had filled the phone, smug and cruel. "Moretti, I've got something that belongs to you." Then Sophia's crying had cut through, his daughter screaming in terror, calling Daddy, and Vincent Moretti's world had shattered in an instant. He had not waited. He had not negotiated. He had gone alone to the place where Caruso was holding his daughter, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. He knew it was a trap. He knew Caruso wanted him to come by himself. He did not care. When your child is in the hands of an enemy, every calculation and every strategy becomes meaningless. He killed 4 guards to get inside. He found Sophia tied up in a dark room, eyes swollen red from crying, and his heart had broken at the sight of his little girl like that. He had gathered her into his arms, promised he would bring her home, promised no one would ever hurt her again. But as he ran out with Sophia in his arms, the bullet came. A shot from the shadows, tearing through his shoulder, making him stumble but not fall. He did not stop. He kept running, blood streaming down his arm, Sophia sobbing in his arms, gunfire cracking behind him like a reminder that death was right on their heels. He had run all night. He had not dared go home, afraid there was a rat on the inside. He had not dared go to a hospital, afraid Caruso had eyes everywhere. He ran until Sophia began to burn with fever, until his legs would no longer hold him, until he collapsed in that ink-black alley and thought it was the end for both of them. Then Cassie appeared, a woman with auburn hair soaked by rain, with green eyes that held no fear, no greed, only pure compassion. She had saved them. "Boss?" Nico's voice pulled Vincent back to the present. "You still there?" "I'm here," Vincent answered, his voice returning to its familiar cold edge. "Listen, Nico. I need you to do a few things. First, keep digging for the rat. I want to know who it is within 48 hours. "Yes, boss." "Second," Vincent hesitated for a moment. "There's a woman, Cassandra Monroe. She works at a laundromat on 12th Street during the day and at a bar on the corner of Ashland at night. I need you to have someone watch her, protect her, but do not let her know." Nico went quiet for a beat, clearly caught off guard. "Who is this woman, boss?" "She's the one who saved me and Sophia," Vincent said, his voice softening slightly when he said Cassie's name. "She doesn't know who I am. She didn't ask for anything. She just helped because it was the right thing to do." "I understand," Nico replied, and his voice carried an understanding Vincent had not expected. "I'll put my best people on her. No one will be able to touch her. No one is allowed to hurt her," Vincent emphasized, his voice carrying the familiar threat. "If anyone lays a hand on her, they'll wish they were never born." "Yes, boss." Vincent ended the call and stood by the window, looking out at the city of Chicago waking beneath the light of dawn. Somewhere out there, Cassie was walking to work on aching feet and sleepless eyes. She did not know that from this moment on, she was being protected by one of the most dangerous forces in Chicago. She also did not know that the man she had saved last night was standing at a window, thinking of her with a feeling he had believed he could no longer feel. Cassie returned to the apartment at 2 in the afternoon, her legs heavy as if they were weighted with lead, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. But in her hands were 2 shopping bags. One held children's fever medicine, antibiotics, and vitamins. The other held food, fresh bread, cheese, eggs, fresh milk, and a little fruit. She had spent the last $47 in her wallet, plus the $20 in tips she had made this morning. $67 total. Everything she had turned into the contents of these 2 bags. Rent was due in 3 days, and she had no idea how she was going to manage. But when she opened the door and saw Sophia sitting up on the bed, her color so much rosier than it had been last night, Cassie knew she had made the right choice. Money could be earned again. A child's life could not. "Miss Cassie," Sophia called softly when she saw her step inside, her voice still weak but no longer raw and hoarse. "What did you buy?" Cassie smiled, set the bags on the table, and sat down beside the bed. "I bought medicine for you, and a little good food too. Are you hungry?" Sophia nodded, her big gray eyes watching Cassie with curiosity now, no longer the fear she had carried in the morning. Vincent stood in the corner of the room, silent, watching the exchange between them. He saw the way Cassie gently checked Sophia's forehead, the way she poured out the medicine and guided the child to take it, her voice soft as a lullaby. He saw the way Sophia began to relax, began to open up to the woman who, only a day ago, had frightened her. "I have a doll at home," Sophia said suddenly as Cassie prepared a small snack. "Her name is Bella. Mommy named her." Cassie's hands stilled, and she turned to look at the child. "Bella is a very beautiful name. What does she look like?" "She has blonde hair and blue eyes," Sophia explained, her voice growing more animated. "She wears a pink dress. Mommy bought her for me when I was 3 years old. Mommy said Bella would protect me when Mommy wasn't there." Vincent felt a sharp pain in his chest as he heard his daughter say Isabella's name. It had been 3 years, but the grief of losing his wife had never truly eased, and he knew that for Sophia, that grief was deeper still, because she had lost her mother when she was too young to understand why Mommy never came back. "Your mommy must have loved you very much," Cassie said gently, without pity, only understanding. "Yes." Sophia nodded, her eyes briefly sad, then bright again. "Daddy loves me too. Daddy always protects me. But yesterday I was so scared. Bad people took me away." Cassie glanced at Vincent, and he saw a silent question in her eyes, but she did not ask. She only turned back to Sophia and lightly smoothed the little girl's wet, black curls. "But you are safe now, aren't you? You are here with Daddy, and I will not let anyone hurt you again." Sophia looked at Cassie, then at her father, then back at Cassie. "She is really good, Daddy," the child said to Vincent, as if sharing a great discovery. "She is like Mommy." Vincent did not know what to say. He only stood there, hearing his daughter compare a stranger to Isabella, the wife he had loved more than life itself. And strangely, he did not feel angry. He felt something warm spreading through his chest, something he had believed had died with Isabella 3 years ago. That evening, Cassie cooked a simple meal from what she had bought. Fried eggs, buttered toast, warm milk for Sophia, and a little cheese. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Yet when the 3 of them sat around the small table in the cramped apartment, the air felt strangely warm. Sophia talked about her school, about a teacher named Miss Helen whom she adored, about her best friend named Lucy whom she missed so much. Cassie listened, asked questions, laughed where she should, and Sophia was like a flower slowly opening beneath sunlight. Vincent sat there, watching the 2 females talk, one grown and one small, and he felt as if he were looking at a scene he had lost long ago. A family sitting down to dinner together, laughter in the room, a kind of warmth no amount of money could buy. He had everything money could purchase: mansions, cars, power, the fear of his enemies, but he had not had this: peace, belonging. And when Sophia yawned and Cassie gently lifted her into bed, when Cassie sang a small lullaby until Sophia drifted off, Vincent Moretti, the infamous Mafia boss of Chicago, realized something in his frozen heart was beginning to melt. Sophia had been asleep for a long time, her breathing steady and soft, as if the nightmare of the past 2 days had never happened. Cassie sat on the old sofa, her back against the armrest, eyes turned toward the window where the streetlights cast faint, blurred bands of light. She was tired to the point her bones felt like they were coming apart, but she could not sleep. Too many questions were circling in her mind. The questions she had deliberately not asked for the past 2 days because she knew the answers might be something she did not want to hear. Vincent stood by the window with his back to her, his tall frame darkened by shadow. He had been silent since dinner, as if weighing something that mattered more than words. Then he turned, his gray eyes locking onto hers with a seriousness she had not seen before. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and slow. "You deserve to know the truth about the man you are helping." Cassie sat up straighter. Her heart beat a little faster, but she kept her face calm. She had known from the first moment that this man was not ordinary. The expensive suit, the bullet wound, the fear of police and hospitals. She was not stupid. She had simply chosen not to ask. "I'm listening," she said. Vincent drew a deep breath, as if bracing for a fight. "My real name is Vincent Moretti. I control a significant part of Chicago. What I do?" He paused. "What people call my work, it is not legal. I'm the head of an organization people call the Mafia." Cassie felt as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over her head. Mafia. The word rang through her mind like an alarm bell. She had heard of the Moretti family, who lived in Chicago, and had not heard of them. The rumors of brutality, enemies who vanished without a trace, an underground empire that controlled everything from casinos to the docks. And the man standing in front of her, the gentle father with the little girl, the man who had trembled all night in fear of losing his child, was the one at the top of that empire. She should have been afraid. She should have screamed and thrown them out of the apartment immediately. She should have called the police, no matter what he said about them killing Sophia. Those were the reasonable reactions, the reactions any normal person would have. But Cassie did not do any of that. She just sat there, looked at Vincent, and asked only one question. "Do you hurt innocent people?" Vincent blinked, clearly not expecting that response. He had prepared for fear, for disgust, for her throwing things at him and screaming that he was a monster. He had not prepared for a calm, direct question like that. "No," he said after a pause. "Never. I've done terrible things in my life. I don't deny it. I've killed people. I've destroyed the lives of traitors. But innocents, women, children, people who have nothing to do with my world, I never touch them. That is my rule. That is the line I never cross." Cassie looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of a lie. She had met enough people in her life. Liars who never blinked, people who promised and then betrayed. She had learned to recognize when someone was telling the truth and when someone was trying to fool her. And in Vincent Moretti's cold gray eyes, she did not see deceit. She saw exhaustion. She saw pain. She saw a man who had lived too long in darkness and no longer knew how to step into the light. "Why aren't you afraid?" Vincent asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "I just told you I'm a killer." "Because I saw the way you held your daughter," Cassie replied, her voice even. "I saw the way you trembled when Sophia's fever spiked. I saw the way you were willing to die to protect her. A true monster can't love like that. You may be Mafia. You may have done horrible things. But you're not heartless." Vincent said nothing. He only stood there, staring at the woman sitting in front of him with a shock he could not hide. In his world, everyone feared him. Enemies feared him for his brutality. Allies feared him for his power. Even the closest people kept their distance because they knew how dangerous he could become. But this woman, she was not afraid. She looked straight into his darkness and refused to run. "You don't have to help us anymore," Vincent said, his voice rough. "I can contact my people and leave tonight. You've done enough. More than enough." Cassie stood, stepped closer, her green eyes fixed on his gray ones. "Sophia is still weak. She needs at least a few more days of rest before she can travel. And your wound still hasn't healed. You think I'm going to throw a sick child and an injured man out into the street in the middle of the night just because he's Mafia? That's the difference between you and me," Vincent murmured. "In my world, that's exactly what would happen." "Well, lucky for you, this isn't your world," Cassie said. "This is my apartment. And in my apartment, we don't abandon people just because they have a complicated past." They sat down on the floor, backs against the wall near the window, far enough from the bed not to wake Sophia, but close enough to hear any sound she might make. The night was late. Outside, the city of Chicago had slipped into sleep, with only the occasional wail of a distant ambulance siren drifting back like a reminder that pain never truly rests. Vincent was silent for a long time after their conversation, his eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him. Then he spoke, his voice low and soft, as if afraid to break the fragile quiet. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "I'm not talking about helping us. I want to know why you live like this. Alone. 2 jobs. This apartment. You're clearly educated, capable. Why are you here?" Cassie did not answer right away. She looked down at her hands, thin fingers with skin roughened by hard work and harsh weather. She had not told her story to anyone in years. She had sealed it shut, buried it deep in her chest, and pretended it did not exist. But tonight, after everything that had happened, after Vincent had laid his own darkness bare in front of her, it felt only fair that she share hers too. "My father left when I was 3, she began, her voice flat, as if she were talking about someone else. "My mother couldn't handle it. She started drinking. At first it was just a little to forget the pain. But then it became a habit, then an addiction. I grew up in a house that always smelled like alcohol and sounded like crying. My mother loved me. I know she did, but she loved the bottle more." Vincent listened in silence, not interrupting, not offering pity. He just sat there, gray eyes on her, with a full, unwavering attention Cassie had never received from anyone. "My mother died when I was 14, Cassie went on. "Cirrhosis. Her body couldn't survive the years of self-destruction. I was sent to an orphanage, and I stayed there until I was 18. "An orphanage," she repeated, as if tasting the bitterness of those years again. "People think it's a place that shelters children. But for me, it was hell. I was bullied because I didn't talk much. I was isolated because I wouldn't blend in. I survived by becoming invisible, by never letting anyone get close enough to hurt me." She stopped and drew a deep breath. This was the hardest part, the part she hated most to remember. "When I turned 18, I left with $200 in my pocket and a dream of a new life. I came to Chicago, worked every job I could, saved every dollar. I met a man named Ryan when I was 21. He was kind, attentive, said the things I wanted to hear. I thought I'd found someone to lean on after so many years alone." Her voice turned bitter as she continued. "He was a con artist. 2 years later, he vanished with all my savings. Everything I had worked myself raw to earn, every coin I had gone without food and clothes to save, he took it all, and I ended up here, 27 years old, 2 jobs, a shabby apartment, and no trust left for anyone." Vincent still did not speak. He just sat there, and somehow, his silence was the most comforting thing Cassie had ever been given. He did not offer clichés like "everything will be fine," or "you're so strong." He only listened, witnessing her pain without trying to soften it or erase it. "I almost died after Ryan left," Cassie whispered, and this was something she had never told anyone. "I stood on the Michigan Avenue Bridge one winter night, looked down at the black water below, and thought it would be easier if I just let go. But Mrs. Margaret, my neighbor, she found me. She pulled me home, fed me hot soup, and told me there was still so much worth living for. I didn't believe her then, but I stepped back from the bridge." Vincent turned to look at her, and for the first time, Cassie saw something in his eyes beyond coldness. It was empathy, the understanding of someone who had wanted to give up too. "She was right," Vincent murmured. "There's still so much worth living for. I forgot that after Isabella, my wife, died. But Sophia kept me here, and now," he looked at Cassie, "meeting you, I'm starting to remember why." They sat there in the dark, 2 people battered by life, people who had lost faith in everything, people who had built tall walls around their hearts. But tonight, those walls had their first cracks, and light was beginning to seep in. The peace did not last long. Around 2 a.m. on the 3rd night, when Cassie had finally dozed off for a little while after her conversation with Vincent, a sound jolted her upright as if she had been shocked. Sophia's pained moan, followed by harsh, gasping breaths, as if the child were drowning on dry land. Cassie lunged to the bed, and what she saw made the blood in her veins feel as though it had turned to ice. Sophia was seizing. Her entire small body trembled violently, her eyes rolled back, white foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. Her skin was hot as burning coals, frighteningly flushed, and sweat had soaked the sheets. Vincent was at the bedside before Cassie even reached it, his hands gripping his daughter's shoulders as if he could hold her to this world by force. "Sophia," he called, his voice breaking with panic. "Sophia, look at Daddy. Baby, wake up. Please, wake up." Cassie had never seen Vincent like this. The man she had known over the past 2 days had been steady, controlled, cold, in a way that was terrifying even while a bullet was being pulled from his shoulder. But now, in front of her, was a father coming apart. His gray eyes were wide with horror. His hands shook uncontrollably, and his voice, the voice of the most feared mafia boss in Chicago, was nothing but the desperate pleading of a man about to lose the most precious thing in the world. "No," Vincent whispered, choking. "No, sweetheart. You can't leave Daddy. Daddy can't lose you. Daddy can't lose anyone else." Cassie forced herself to stay calm, even though her heart was slamming wildly in her chest. She pressed her hand to Sophia's forehead and felt searing heat pour into her palm. The fever was high, higher than it had ever been before. She guessed at least 40 degrees, maybe more. At this temperature, a child's brain could be permanently damaged. Sophia needed a doctor. Immediately. "Vincent," Cassie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You need to calm down. You're making her more scared." Vincent did not hear her. He kept holding Sophia, kept whispering useless pleas as if prayer could burn away his daughter's fever. Cassie understood. She understood his fear. He had lost his wife. He could not bear losing his daughter too. But this was not the moment for panic. This was the moment for action. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number she had known by heart since high school. Rachel answered after 3 rings, her voice sleepy and annoyed. "Cassie, do you know what time it is?" "Rachel, I need you," Cassie said fast. "There's a 5-year-old with a high fever and seizures. I think it's pneumonia. Can you come to my apartment right now? Bring anything you have." Rachel's voice changed instantly, the sleep vanishing, replaced by the crisp professionalism of a nurse. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep her on her side so she doesn't choke if she vomits. Use warm compresses, not cold, on her forehead and under her arms. Try to get her to drink water if she's alert." Cassie followed the instructions. But the hardest part was not caring for Sophia. It was pulling Vincent out of panic. She had to take his face in her hands, force him to look her in the eyes, and speak in the hardest voice she could find. "Vincent, look at me. My friend is a nurse. She's coming, but I need you clear-headed. Sophia needs you clear-headed. Do you understand?" Vincent's gray eyes slowly found focus again, and he nodded, once, slowly. He was still trembling, still terrified, but he was trying to hold himself together. 20 minutes later, Rachel arrived with the medical bag she always kept with her. She was a small woman, with black hair pulled into a high ponytail and sharp brown eyes, and she did not waste a second before getting to work. She checked Sophia's temperature, 40.3. She listened to the child's lungs with her stethoscope, and her face grew more severe with every passing second. "Pneumonia," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Severe. There's fluid in her lungs. She needs injectable antibiotics immediately. If she isn't treated in the next few hours, she could crash very fast." Cassie felt her heart sink. She knew Rachel was not the type to exaggerate. If Rachel said it was serious, it meant it was serious. "She needs a hospital," Rachel went on. "This isn't something you can treat at home." "No," Vincent said, his voice rough but absolute. "No hospital. Someone is hunting us. If we go to a hospital, they'll find us." Rachel looked at Vincent, then at Cassie, her eyes full of questions. But she did not ask. She had been Cassie's friend long enough to know when to question and when to trust. "All right," Rachel exhaled. "I can get antibiotics from the hospital. I have a morning shift tomorrow. I'll bring them back. But it'll cost money, and it won't be cheap." "How much?" Vincent asked immediately. "I'll pay whatever it takes." Rachel studied him, taking in the strange man standing in her friend's poor apartment with the kind of look that suggested he could buy the world if he wanted to. "About $300, she said. "Enough for a full course of treatment." Vincent didn't blink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of cash Cassie had not known he carried. He counted out 5 $100 bills and handed them to Rachel. "Get extra for anything she needs. And thank you." Rachel took the money, looked at Cassie again with an expression that said they were going to have a very long conversation later, then turned back to her work. She gave Sophia an injection to bring the fever down, showed Cassie how to care for her through the night, and promised she would return with the antibiotics as soon as she could. When Rachel left, the small apartment sank back into silence, broken only by Sophia's heavy breathing and the wind hissing through the window frame. Vincent dropped to his knees beside his daughter's bed, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking, and Cassie realized he was crying. The Mafia boss was crying like a child beside his daughter's sickbed. News traveled through the old building faster than the wind. Maybe it was Rachel's hurried footsteps as she ran up the stairs at 2 in the morning. Maybe it was Sophia's crying carrying through the thin walls. Or maybe it was simply the instinct of people who had lived beside one another for too long, people who had learned to recognize when someone was in trouble. The first to appear was Mrs. Margaret Chen, the 74-year-old woman who lived in the apartment directly below Cassie. She knocked at 4 a.m, her silver hair still mussed from sleep, but in her hands she carried a pot of steaming chicken soup no one could figure out when she had managed to make. "I heard noise," she said when Cassie opened the door, her eyes already fixed on the inside of the apartment as she stepped forward without waiting to be invited. "There's a sick child, isn't there? Grandma's chicken soup will help her get better." She walked in as if it were her own home, set the pot on the stove, and went straight to Sophia's bedside. She did not ask about the strange man kneeling there with red-rimmed eyes. She did not care about the bandage on his shoulder, or the danger that seemed to radiate from the hard lines of his face. She cared only about the child burning with fever and needing help. "Poor baby," Mrs. Margaret whispered, her wrinkled hand gently smoothing Sophia's dark hair. "She reminds me of my granddaughter. Years ago, my granddaughter had pneumonia like this. I stayed up 7 nights to care for her." Vincent stared at the unfamiliar woman with confusion he could not hide. In his world, no one did anything without a reason. No one gave without wanting something back. But this woman had woken at 4 a.m. to bring soup to a child whose name she did not even know. Before he could fully grasp what was happening, the door opened again, and Marcus Williams stepped inside. He was a 34-year-old man from downstairs, a mechanic raising 2 children alone after his wife had left. In his arms were 2 thick blankets, the warmest ones he had in his home. "Mrs. Margaret texted me," Marcus explained, setting the blankets on the old sofa. "It's cold like this. The little girl needs to stay warm. I've got some children's cough medicine too. Let me go get it." He disappeared and returned only 5 minutes later with a bottle of cough syrup and a little vitamin C. Then Danny Nguyen showed up, the 22-year-old medical student who lived at the end of the hall. He came as soon as Rachel called, asking for help, carrying a stethoscope and his own blood pressure cuff. He knelt beside Sophia's bed, helping Rachel check the child's vital signs with the focus of someone learning how to save a life. "Heart rate is a little fast but steady," Danny reported. "Blood pressure is normal. Temperature is coming down. She's responding to the medication." Cassie's tiny apartment suddenly felt crowded with kind people. Mrs. Margaret stood by the stove, ladling chicken soup into bowls and insisting everyone eat so they would have strength. Marcus sat in the corner of the room, ready to run for anything they might need. Danny and Rachel took turns monitoring Sophia, writing down every change in her condition. And Cassie stood in the middle of it all, feeling her heart warm in a strange, powerful way, even as fear sat in her throat so hard she wanted to cry. Vincent watched everything with eyes that could not believe what he was seeing. These people were poor. He could see it in their worn clothes, in hands calloused from labor, in the tiredness of people who worked too many hours each day just to survive. They had nothing, yet they were giving everything. Mrs. Margaret's chicken soup was probably made from the last chicken in her refrigerator. Marcus's warm blankets were probably something his own children needed on a cold night like this. Danny's medicine likely cost a struggling student his spending money, but they gave anyway, without demanding, without calculating, without asking who he was or why he was here. They only saw a child who needed help, and they helped. As simple as that. "You don't know us," Vincent finally said, his voice rough as he spoke to Mrs. Margaret. "Why are you helping us?" Mrs. Margaret looked at him, eyes old but still bright with the wisdom of someone who had survived too many storms. "My boy," she said gently, "when a person is in trouble, we don't ask who they are, we only ask what they need. That's how poor people like us survive. We don't have money, we don't have power, we don't have anything. But we have each other. And sometimes, that's all that's needed." Vincent felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. For 36 years of his life, he had built an empire on fear and loyalty bought with money. He had believed everything had a price, every kindness had a motive, every helping hand was an investment waiting for profit. But these people had proved him wrong. They had shown him a world he had not known existed. A world where kindness needed no reason, where love had no conditions, where the poorest people were the richest in the one thing that mattered most. Rachel returned at 5 a.m. with injectable antibiotics she had taken from the hospital. She did not explain how she got them, and no one asked. There are moments in life when rules have to step aside for compassion, and this was one of those moments. She gave Sophia the first dose while Danny held the child's small arms steady, and everyone in the room held their breath and waited. Time moved with the slow cruelty of torture. Every minute stretched like an hour. Every breath Sophia took was watched as if it were the most important thing in the world. Vincent sat motionless beside his daughter's bed, his eyes never leaving the small face flushed with fever. He did not pray. He had not prayed since Isabella died, since he had lost faith in any higher power that could sit and watch his wife die and do nothing. But tonight, in this poor apartment, surrounded by strangers who gave without asking, he found himself whispering pleas he did not even know he still remembered. Then the miracle happened. At about 5:45, Sophia's temperature began to fall. Rachel checked again and nodded with relief. 38.5. It's coming down. The medication is working. 20 minutes later, as the first threads of dawn began to slip through the worn curtain, Sophia opened her eyes. Not the fever-clouded eyes of the hours before, but clear, awake, gray eyes, looking up at her father in confusion. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak but unmistakably clear. "I'm thirsty." Vincent could not speak. He only reached for the glass of water Cassie had already prepared, gently lifted Sophia's head, and helped her drink in small sips. His hands shook, his whole body shook, and when Sophia finished, when she closed her eyes again and sank into real, peaceful sleep, not the painful delirium of the hours before, Vincent Moretti collapsed. He bowed his head onto the edge of the bed, his shoulders trembling, and tears began to fall. He cried without sound, his body shuddering with each suppressed sob. He had not cried since the day Isabella was lowered into the ground, since the day he stood at his wife's grave with Sophia in his arms and swore he would never be weak again. But tonight, he could not hold it back. The terror of almost losing his daughter, the exhaustion after 3 nights without sleep, and the crushing gratitude toward the strangers who had saved Sophia's life, all hit him at once like an emotional tidal wave. Cassie stood in the corner of the room, watching the man she had believed could never be brought to his knees, crying like a child beside his daughter's bed. She wanted to go to him, to place a hand on his shoulder and tell him everything would be all right, but she knew this was his private moment, a moment he needed to live through alone. Mrs. Margaret was the one who broke the silence. She stepped to Vincent and laid her wrinkled hand on his shoulder with the tenderness of a mother. "My son," she said softly, "cry. Don't hold it in. Tears aren't a sign of weakness. They're a sign of a heart that can still love. And a father who loves his child the way you love this little girl, that's the most precious thing in the world." Vincent lifted his head and looked at the old woman with wet, red-rimmed eyes. She did not know who he was. She did not know what he had done in his life, the crimes he had committed, the lives he had taken. But she looked at him and saw only a father in pain, and somehow, that made him feel as if he were still human. "I don't deserve this kindness," Vincent said, his voice rough. "You don't know what kind of man I am." Mrs. Margaret smiled. The gentle smile of someone who had lived long enough to understand the world was not as simple as black and white. "I don't need to know who you are out there," she said. "I only know who you are in this room. You are a father who loves his daughter enough to die for her. You are a man who cried when his child slipped away from death's sickle. And for me, that is enough." Outside the window, the sun had climbed higher, warm golden light filling the small room. Sophia slept peacefully, her breathing even, her skin turning rosy again. Rachel and Danny were packing up their medical supplies. Marcus had gone home to get his children ready for school, and Mrs. Margaret was ladling chicken soup into bowls so everyone could eat breakfast. Cassie looked at the scene in front of her and felt something warm spread through her chest. This was what she had been searching for her whole life without realizing it. Not money, not success, but connection, community, people willing to give without needing a reason. And when her eyes met Vincent's across the room, she knew he was feeling the same thing. The apartment fell quiet again after the neighbors left one by one. Mrs. Margaret was the last to go. She did not forget the pot of chicken soup on the stove, and she reminded Cassie to feed Sophia when the little girl woke up. Rachel promised she would come back in the afternoon to give the next antibiotic injection, and Danny left his phone number in case anything urgent happened. Now there were only 3 people left in the small room, and 2 of them were asleep. Sophia lay on the bed, breathing evenly and softly, her color restored after last night's nightmare, and Cassie had slumped asleep on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wall, her head tipped to one side at an angle that looked painfully uncomfortable. She had not slept for 3 straight nights, worked 16 hours a day, and still spent every remaining moment caring for 2 strangers who owed her nothing, and to whom she owed nothing. Vincent stood by the window, looking down at the woman sleeping so deeply. Her auburn hair was tangled, dark circles lay beneath her closed eyes, and her skin was pale with exhaustion. She looked so fragile that Vincent felt his chest tighten. He quietly took the blanket Marcus had brought, bent down, and covered Cassie with it. She did not wake. She only shifted a little and curled tighter beneath the warm weight. And in that moment, as he looked at the peaceful set of her face in sleep, Vincent thought of Isabella. His wife had possessed a heart like that, Isabella was a music teacher he had met by chance at a charity concert, the only woman who had ever looked at him and not seen darkness. She had not known he was Mafia when they met. She had only seen a lonely man standing by himself in the corner of the room, and she had walked over and spoken to him with the warmest smile he had ever seen. When he told her the truth, when he revealed who he really was, Isabella had cried. She had been afraid. She had wanted to run, but then she stayed, not because she accepted his world, but because she believed she could change him, pull him out of the dark. She had tried for the 5 years they were together, and when she died, a part of Vincent died with her. But Cassie was different. Cassie knew who he was from the beginning. She knew he was Mafia, knew he had killed, knew he was dangerous, and she did not cry. She did not fear him. She did not try to change him, or drag him out of the shadows. She only looked at him and asked one question: did he hurt innocent people? When he said no, she believed him. That was it. She did not look at him the way someone looks at a sinner they want to save. She looked at him like a human being, with all the light and darkness inside, and she accepted both. Vincent did not understand why. He had lived 36 years, met thousands of people, looked into the eyes of enemies and allies, the fearful and the greedy. He thought he understood people. But Cassie confused him. She was so poor she had to tape her shoes together. She worked 16 hours a day, and still did not have enough to cover rent. She had every reason to be bitter, to hate the world, to think only of herself. But instead, she saved strangers in the middle of a stormy night. She spent her last dollars on medicine for a child who was not hers. She stayed awake all night to care for a man she knew was dangerous. She was different, Vincent whispered into the dark, his gray eyes fixed on Cassie's sleeping face. Completely different. And for the first time since Isabella was gone, Vincent Moretti felt something begin to stir in the heart he had believed had turned to stone. He did not know what it was. He did not dare name it, but it was there. Warm and frightening at the same time, like the first sunlight after a long winter. He stood there in the shadows, guarding the sleep of the two most important females in his life right now, and wondered if life was offering him a second chance. Vincent made his decision within an hour after his conversation with Cassie. If he was going to stay, he would not hide anything anymore. The people in this building deserved to know the truth, to know what they were facing, and to have the right to choose whether they wanted to stay or leave. He asked Cassie to gather all the residents in Mrs. Margaret's apartment on the first floor, the largest one in the building. 15 minutes later, everyone was there. Mrs. Margaret sat in her worn armchair. Marcus leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Danny sat on the floor with a curious look on his face. A few other neighbors Cassie did not know very well had come too. Vincent stood in front of them. Sophia was asleep upstairs on the 3rd floor with Rachel watching over her, and he looked at each face before he spoke. "I need to tell everyone something important," he began, his voice low and clear. "My real name is Vincent Moretti." A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the room. The name Moretti was not unfamiliar to anyone who lived in Chicago. It showed up in newspapers, on the news, in whispered stories about the underworld, and cases that were never solved. "I'm the head of one of the biggest mafia organizations in this city," Vincent continued, not avoiding the truth. "I've done things the law doesn't allow. I have enemies, and now, one of those enemies is trying to kill me and my daughter. He knows I'm somewhere in this area. It's only a matter of time before he finds this building." The room was so silent you could hear the wind hissing through the window frame. Vincent met each person's eyes, waiting for fear, outrage, the demand that he leave immediately. "I won't blame anyone who wants to get out of here," he said. "In fact, I recommend you do. I have money. I can pay for all of you to stay in a hotel until this is over. What I can't do is guarantee anyone's safety if you stay." He paused, waiting for the reaction. But no one moved. No one spoke. They only stared at him with expressions he could not read. Then Mrs. Margaret stood. She walked slowly up to Vincent, her old eyes looking straight into his gray ones. "My boy," she said, her voice calm, as if she were talking about the weather. "Cassie is family to us. She's lived in this building for 5 years. She's helped everyone without ever asking for anything in return. When I was sick, she made porridge for me. When Marcus had no one to watch his children, she kept them. When Danny needed someone to sign as a guarantor for his apartment, she stepped in. She is one of us." Mrs. Margaret stopped, then took Vincent's hand in her wrinkled but warm one. "And you're someone she chose to help. That's enough for me. I'm not going anywhere." Marcus pushed off the wall and nodded at Vincent. "I used to be military," he said. "I know how to handle a gun. If something happens, I'll fight." Danny stood up from the floor. "I'm a medical student. If anyone gets hurt, I can help." One by one, the residents of the old building stepped forward and declared they would stay. Not because they were brave, not because they were not afraid, but because in their world, where no one had much money or power, the only thing they truly had was one another, and they did not abandon their own. Vincent stood there, feeling as if someone had struck him in the chest. For the second time in a few days, these poor people forced him to reconsider everything he had ever believed about human nature. 2 hours later, Nico arrived with an elite team of 6 men. They came in unmarked vehicles, wearing street clothes so they would not attract attention. They carried weapons, communications gear, and portable security cameras. Vincent met Nico at the back entrance of the building, the one with the least foot traffic. "Boss," Nico said, looking around the old building with an expression that was not impressed. "This is really where you want to make your stand?" "This is what I will protect," Vincent replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Set up a security perimeter. Cameras on every entrance, guards around the clock. And Nico," he looked straight into the eyes of his loyal lieutenant, "the people in this building aren't obstacles. They're people who need protecting. If anyone on the team hurts them, they'll answer to me." Nico nodded, already used to following orders without asking why. "Understood, boss." And while Nico's team began setting up defenses, Vincent stood at the third-floor window, looking down at the dark streets of the south side, and waited for the storm to come. The attack came at 2 in the morning on the 4th day. Vincent was sitting in front of the security camera monitor in Cassie's apartment when he saw them. Dark shapes moving through the night, closing in on the building from both directions. He counted fast. 10 men, armed with automatic weapons, moving in a military formation. Tony Caruso was not playing games. "They're here," Vincent said into the radio, his voice cold as steel. 10 shooters, 2 teams, front and back. Everyone to your positions." He turned to Cassie, who was standing beside Sophia's bed, her face pale but determined. "You stay here with Sophia. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone unless you hear my voice." Cassie nodded without a word. She had known this was coming. She had prepared herself. But knowing and actually facing it were 2 completely different things. Vincent charged out of the apartment, gun in hand, and vanished into the darkness of the hallway. Seconds later, the first gunshots cracked. Cassie jerked, instinct telling her to run, to hide, to do anything to escape that deadly sound. But Sophia was on the bed, eyes wide with terror, and Cassie knew she could not go anywhere. She was the last wall between this child and whatever waited outside. "Miss Cassie," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm scared." Cassie sat on the bed and pulled Sophia into her arms. Shh, sweetheart. Daddy will protect us. Everything will be okay." But the gunfire outside grew fiercer. Cassie could hear shouting, footsteps pounding, glass shattering. She held Sophia tighter, her body shielding the child like a living barrier. Then she heard it. Footsteps right outside the apartment door. Heavy, slow. Not Vincent's steps. Not anyone from Nico's team. These were the steps of a predator closing in on its prey. Cassie set Sophia back on the bed, motioned for her to stay quiet, then stood and searched the apartment for something she could use as a weapon. Her eyes landed on the cast-iron skillet on the stove, the one Mrs. Margaret had used to make chicken soup. Heavy, solid, better than nothing. She lifted it carefully, felt the weight of it in her hands, and pressed herself against the wall beside the door. Her heart was hammering in her chest, but her hands did not shake. She had survived too much in her life to fall apart now. She would not let anyone touch Sophia. The door was kicked in. A man dressed in black burst inside, gun raised, sweeping the room for his target. He saw Sophia on the bed, and a cruel smile spread across his mouth, but he did not see Cassie. He did not see the cast-iron skillet swinging down. The sound of metal striking bone cracked sharp and clean. The gunman dropped to the floor like a sack, his weapon flying from his hand, and he did not move again. Cassie stood there, breathing hard, the skillet still in her grip, staring down at the attacker unconscious at her feet. She had done it. She had actually done it. "Miss Cassie," Sophia said from the bed, her voice full of awe, "you knocked the bad man out." Before Cassie could answer, a huge blast sounded from downstairs, followed by screaming and a burst of rapid gunfire. Then silence, a silence more frightening than the shots. Cassie tightened her grip on the skillet, stood in front of Sophia, and waited for the worst. But when the door opened again, the man who appeared was Vincent. He was covered in blood, some of it his from the old wound ripped open again, some of it the enemy's. His gray eyes swept the room, from the unconscious gunman on the floor to Cassie standing there with a skillet in her hand, and he stopped. "You took him down," Vincent said, and his voice was strange. "With a frying pan." Cassie glanced at the makeshift weapon in her hand and shrugged. "I used what was there." Vincent looked at her, and something in his eyes changed. He had watched on the camera as the gunman broke in. He had seen Cassie rise, take the skillet, and wait beside the wall. He had seen her move without a second of hesitation when the enemy appeared. His heart had clenched when he realized she had been ready to fight to the death to protect his daughter. "It's over," Vincent said, stepping into the room. "Tony Caruso has been captured. He's alive, but his men weren't as lucky." Cassie let the skillet drop, her legs suddenly weak as the adrenaline began to drain from her system. She nearly fell, but Vincent was there, catching her, holding her upright. "Are you okay?" he asked, and his voice was gentler than she had ever heard from him. "I'm okay," Cassie whispered. "My legs are just a little shaky." Vincent stared at her, at the woman who had defeated an enemy with a skillet, who had stood between his daughter and death without trembling, and in that moment, he knew he would never meet anyone like her again. "Daddy!" Sophia called from the bed, eyes wide. "Miss Cassie saved me. She's a superhero." Vincent looked from his daughter to Cassie, then back to his daughter. "Yeah, my little princess. She really is a superhero." Nico's team cleaned up the scene with the crisp efficiency of men who had done this far too many times. The bodies of the gunmen were removed. The blood was wiped away. The shattered window was covered with a tarp. Tony Caruso, handcuffed and gagged, was loaded into a vehicle to wait for Vincent to decide his fate. The building fell quiet again, as if nothing had happened, except for the bullet holes in the walls and the faint, lingering scent of gunpowder in the air. Sophia had gone back to sleep after Vincent reassured her that everything was all right. Rachel, who had stayed through the night to give Sophia her antibiotic injections, sat now at the bedside, keeping watch as the child slept. And Cassie and Vincent sat on the floor by the window, where the streetlight spilled in just enough glow for Cassie to see his wound. The old injury on his shoulder had torn open again during the fight, blood soaking through the bandage. Cassie gently unwound the old wrapping, cleaned the wound with rubbing alcohol, and began to dress it again, her movements steady now, practiced from days of caring for him. Vincent sat still and let her work, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "You're so serious," he said softly. Cassie did not look up. Anyone would be serious while bandaging a man who just almost died. "I didn't almost die," Vincent argued. "I'm only lightly wounded." Cassie paused and looked at him, her eyes holding not a shred of belief. "You were shot in the shoulder 4 days ago and the wound just tore back open. You have a cut on your arm from tonight's fight. You're losing blood. And you call that lightly wounded?" Vincent smiled. A small smile Cassie had never seen from him before. It softened the cold lines of his face, made him look younger, and so handsome it stole her breath. "I've survived worse than this," he said. "But do you know what's strange? Before, when I was hurt, I never cared. I always thought, if I died, then fine. Sophia would be taken care of by Nico. The organization would keep running. I had nothing to hold on to." He stopped, gray eyes sinking into hers. "But meeting you changed everything. For the first time in 3 years, I've started to want to live. Not just for Sophia, even though she's everything to me, but to live for myself. Because I want to wake up every morning and see you." Cassie felt her heart pound wildly. She wanted to say something, to push back, to tell him he was only overwhelmed because he had just survived a fight, but no words came. She only sat there, her hand still resting on his arm where she had finished the bandage, and looked into his gray eyes as if he were looking at her like she was the most precious thing on earth. "I know I don't deserve you," Vincent went on, his voice low and sincere. "I'm Mafia. I've done horrible things. I bring danger everywhere I go. You deserve someone better. Someone without blood on his hands. Someone who can give you the normal life you dream of. But I'm selfish. I want you. And if you allow it, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become a man worthy of you." Outside the window, the sky was turning from black to gray. The first pale light of dawn began to show on the horizon. A new day was coming, and with it, a chance for new beginnings. Cassie did not speak. She did not have to. She leaned forward, lifted a hand to his cheek, and kissed him. Their first kiss happened in the dawnlight, gentle and tender as a promise. Vincent answered her immediately, one arm wrapping around her waist and pulling her closer, as if he feared that if he let go, she would vanish like a dream. They kissed in the tiny, worn apartment, amid the smell of gunpowder and blood, amid the aftermath of a battle that had just ended, and nowhere in the world could have felt more perfect. Then a soft giggle came from the bed. They both startled and turned to see Sophia sitting up, gray eyes bright with delight, a huge grin on her small face. "Daddy is kissing Miss Cassie," Sophia squealed, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I knew it. I knew Daddy liked Miss Cassie." Vincent and Cassie looked at each other, and then they both burst into laughter. It was the laughter of relief, of happiness, of hope, for a future neither of them had dared to imagine just a few days earlier. And Sophia hopped down from the bed and ran to wrap her arms around both of them, as if she had been waiting for this moment her whole small life. That afternoon, Vincent made the most important decision of his life. He stood in the basement of an abandoned warehouse, where Nico was holding Tony Caruso. His enemy was strapped to a chair, face bruised from the fight the night before, yet his eyes still burned with defiance. "Do it, Moretti," Tony spat, his voice thick with contempt. "Kill me. That's how our world works. You know it. I know it. Don't pretend you've changed just because you met a girl." Vincent looked down at the man who had kidnapped his daughter, the man who had nearly killed Sophia, the man who had threatened Cassie and innocent neighbors. In the past, he would not have hesitated. One bullet to the head and it would be over. That was the law of the underworld. Blood for blood, a life for a life. But today, he looked at Tony Caruso and did not see an enemy that needed to be erased. He saw a reminder of the man he had been, of the man he did not want to be anymore. "No," Vincent said, his voice calm. "I'm not going to kill you." Nico, standing beside him, stared with surprise he could not hide. "Boss? Turn him over to the police," Vincent ordered. "With all the evidence of Sophia's kidnapping and the attack on a residential building, he'll sit in prison long enough that he won't be a threat anymore." Tony stared at Vincent as if he had grown a second head. "You're insane," Tony said. "You think you can walk away from this world by being a good man? They'll tear you apart." "Maybe," Vincent replied. "But that's my problem, not yours." He turned and walked away without looking back. Nico followed, silent for a moment before speaking. "Boss, I don't understand. This isn't how we do things." "This is the new way," Vincent said. "I'm changing, Nico. I want to make everything legitimate. Slowly, step by step, the legal businesses will expand. The illegal ones will shrink, then disappear. I want to build an empire my daughter can be proud of, not ashamed of." Nico studied him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I understand. This is because of her, isn't it? Because of Cassie." Vincent did not deny it. "She's part of the reason. But not only because of her, because of Sophia. Because of the people who helped us without asking for anything. Because of myself. I've lived in the dark too long, Nico. It's time to find a way out." That evening, Vincent returned to Cassie's apartment. Sophia was much better. She sat drawing pictures with Mrs. Margaret while Rachel checked her one last time before declaring she was past the danger. Cassie stood by the window, looking out at the city sinking into sunset. Vincent came to stand beside her. He did not speak at first. He only stood there with her, watching the sky change color. "Tony Caruso is going to the police," he said after a long moment. "I didn't kill him." Cassie turned to look at him, green eyes holding a surprise she did not try to hide. "Why?" "Because I want to change," Vincent answered. "Because of you. Because of Sophia. Because I've seen another way to live these past days, and I want it. I want to be someone you can love without shame." Cassie was quiet for a moment, taking in what he had said. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but serious. "I'm not asking you to change for me. You know that, right? If you change, do it for yourself." "I know," Vincent said. "And I'm doing it for myself. You're just the one who showed me it could happen." They stood together in the sunset light, two people from completely different worlds who had somehow found each other in a stormy night. "I can't promise anything," Cassie whispered. "I've been hurt too many times. I don't know if I can fully trust someone again." "I understand," Vincent said. "Me too. But we can try. Slowly, step by step. No rushing, no forcing. Just two people trying to learn how to trust again." Cassie looked at him, then nodded. "All right, we'll try. Slowly, step by step." And when Sophia ran over to hug them both, asking if Miss Cassie would stay for dinner, Vincent looked down at the two most important people in his life and felt something he had believed he could no longer feel. Hope. Hope for a future where he no longer had to live in the dark. 2 weeks after that fateful night, Vincent did something no one in the building expected. He bought the entire apartment building. The news raced through the worn hallways, and at first, everyone was anxious. They had heard too many stories about new landlords who bought properties and then raised the rent, or pushed out longtime tenants to build luxury apartments. They feared that no matter how kind Vincent had been these past days, he was still a businessman, and businessmen cared only about profit. But Vincent proved them wrong. On the first day after the purchase paperwork was complete, he called all the residents together in Mrs. Margaret's apartment and made an announcement. "No one has to leave," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Rent will stay the same. In fact, I'm going to reduce it by 20% for everyone for the first 6 months. to make up for the inconvenience during renovations. And I'm going to renovate this building until it becomes the best place to live in the neighborhood. Work began the following week. Repair crews came in to replace the entire plumbing system, rusted through with age. Electricians inspected and upgraded the wiring. Old windows were replaced with new ones that insulated better. The stairwell was reinforced and repainted. New lights went into the hallways. Each apartment was repaired according to the tenants' needs, from patching holes in walls to replacing broken sinks. Vincent did not just throw money at the building and disappear. He was there every day, overseeing the work, listening to residents' feedback, and making sure everything was done properly. He learned everyone's name, asked about their lives, and little by little, from a dangerous stranger, he became part of the community. Mrs. Margaret was the first to accept him completely. She invited him to dinner, cooked him roast chicken she claimed was a family recipe, and told him stories about her late husband, her voice full of love. Marcus began by nodding hello whenever they passed in the hallway. Then slowly it became short conversations about football and the weather. Danny asked Vincent for business advice about the future after medical school. And the children in the building, who had been afraid at first of the tall man with the cold eyes, now ran to greet him whenever he appeared. Cassie watched all these changes with amazement she did not try to hide. She saw Vincent playing chess with Mr. Johnson on the second floor, helping Mrs. Martinez carry groceries up the stairs, teaching Marcus's son how to fix a bicycle. This was not the Mafia boss she had heard about. This was a man trying to become a better version of himself, and she loved him for it. But the biggest change came from Sophia. She had recovered fully from pneumonia and now burst with energy the way any 5-year-old should. She spent most of her time in Cassie's apartment, following her everywhere like a little shadow, talking nonstop about everything from her doll Bella to what she wanted to be when she grew up. One evening, as Cassie read a fairy tale to Sophia before bed, the little girl suddenly paused and looked up at her with big gray eyes. "Miss Cassie," she said, her voice soft but serious. "Can I call you Mommy Cassie?" Cassie felt as if someone had closed a fist around her heart. She looked down at Sophia's innocent face, saw the longing and hope in the child's eyes, and she could not say no. "You can call me whatever you want," Cassie whispered, her voice thick. Vincent stood in the doorway, watching it all. When his eyes met Cassie's, she saw a gratitude so deep it could not be put into words. Sophia had not called anyone Mommy since Isabella died. This was the biggest step the child had taken in 3 years. From that night on, Sophia began calling Cassie Mommy Cassie. And every time Cassie heard those words, she felt something in her heart. The part that had frozen after her mother died and after Ryan betrayed her began to melt. She had never thought she could become anyone's mother. She had never thought she deserved a child's love. But Sophia had chosen her. And that meant more than anything Cassie had ever been given in her life. They were no longer 3 strangers clinging to one another in a storm. They were becoming a family. A year had passed since that fateful stormy night. 12 months of healing, of trust rebuilt one brick at a time, of love taking root between 2 hearts that had once seemed turned to stone. And now, on a November afternoon, exactly 1 year after the day they met, Vincent and Cassie stood on the rooftop of the apartment building, preparing to speak their wedding vows. The wedding was not held in a grand church or a luxury hotel the way people might expect from one of the richest men in Chicago. Cassie had refused every lavish offer Vincent made. She wanted their wedding to happen where their story began, where they found each other, where they learned the true meaning of family and community. The rooftop had been decorated simply, but beautifully. Strings of small lights were draped everywhere, creating a warm, romantic glow. Flower pots grown by Mrs. Margaret lined the railing. Wooden chairs borrowed from throughout the building were arranged in 2 rows for guests to sit. There were no expensive fresh flowers, no extravagant decorations, only love and sincerity in every small detail. Mrs. Margaret had stayed up for 2 nights to make the wedding cake. It was a 3-tier cake with white frosting and small handmade flowers. She said it was the recipe she had used for her own wedding 60 years earlier, and she could not think of a better gift for the couple she now considered family. Rachel stood beside Cassie as maid of honor, her eyes already wet even though the ceremony had not begun. She had watched Cassie survive too much pain in her life, had stayed with her through the darkest nights, and now she was getting to see her friend step into a new chapter filled with happiness. Nico stood beside Vincent, the loyal protector who had become his boss's closest friend. He still could not fully believe the change in Vincent over the past year, from a cold Mafia boss to a man who could love and be loved. Every resident in the building was there. Marcus with his 2 children, Danny in a new suit bought with his first paycheck as a resident doctor, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Martinez. and everyone else who had become Cassie's family during the 5 years she had lived here. They sat in their wooden chairs, eyes on the couple, and in their faces was real joy for the people they loved. Cassie wore a simple white dress she had found in a thrift store and altered herself to fit. She did not need an expensive gown or glittering jewelry. She only needed the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle, gray eyes on her, as if she were the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. Vincent wore a black suit, simple and elegant. But what made him different was not the clothing. It was the smile on his mouth, the light in his eyes, the peace in his face. This was a Vincent no one in Chicago's underworld would have recognized. The ceremony was led by a local pastor who had known Cassie since she first moved into the neighborhood. He spoke about love, forgiveness, and new beginnings, and every word echoed in the hearts of the two people standing before him. Then it was time for the vows. Vincent took Cassie's hands, looked deep into her eyes, and spoke in a low, warm voice filled with emotion. "Cassie, a year ago, you saved my life and my daughter's life. But more than that, you saved my soul. You showed me that even in the deepest darkness, light is waiting. You taught me that true strength is not power or money, but love and compassion. I promise to love you, protect you, and become a man worthy of you until my final breath." Cassie's tears were already streaming down her cheeks when she answered, "Vincent, I lived 27 years believing I wasn't worthy of love, that I would always be alone, that happiness belonged to other people, not to me. But then you appeared in that stormy night, and everything changed. You and Sophia gave me a family. You gave me hope, and I promised to love you, trust you, and walk with you through every storm life brings." When it was time for the rings, Sophia stepped forward with a small pillow in her hands, where 2 gold rings rested. She wore a pink dress, her black curls braided neatly, and the brightest smile anyone had ever seen. She handed the rings to her father and to Cassie, then stood there watching them place the rings on each other's hands, eyes shining with happiness. When the ceremony ended, when Vincent kissed Cassie to the applause and cheers of everyone, Sophia tugged on Cassie's hand and asked in a voice full of hope, "Mommy Cassie, now you're my real mommy, right?" Cassie knelt down, gathered the little girl into her arms, and whispered through tears of joy, "Yes, sweetheart. Now I'm your real mother. Forever." 2 years after the wedding, life for the Moretti family had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The old apartment building that once felt worn and tired had become one of the most beautiful residential places on the South Side, with freshly painted walls, a modern security system, and a small rooftop garden where residents could grow vegetables and sit in peace. But more important than any physical improvement, the spirit of community had stayed the same. Mrs. Margaret still made chicken soup whenever someone in the building got sick. Marcus still fixed neighbors' cars without taking money. Danny, now a second-year resident doctor, still offered free checkups for residents every weekend. They were still a family. They just had a better roof over their heads now, a better place to shelter one another. Cassie stood by the window in her office, looking out over the women's support center she had built from nothing. The center was called the Lighthouse. It was on the ground floor of a building Vincent had bought and renovated, and it provided shelter, counseling, and job training for women escaping domestic violence or trying to rebuild their lives after tragedy. Over the past 2 years, the center had helped more than 300 women and children. Cassie had turned her own pain into strength to help others. She understood the women who came here because she had once been one of them. She knew what it felt like to be alone, to be betrayed, to believe you were not worthy of love, and she wanted to tell them there was hope, that life could change, that happiness was still waiting if they were willing to open their hearts and receive it. Vincent had kept his promise. Over the past 2 years, he had gradually made nearly his entire business empire legitimate. Hidden gambling houses were converted into legal entertainment clubs. Loan shark operations were replaced with a financial company offering fair interest loans to people who could not access traditional banks. His restaurants and hotels now operated fully within the law. He was no longer a mafia boss. He was a businessman, a husband, a father. Sophia was 7 now, in 2nd grade, and the top student in her class. She was no longer shy and frightened the way she had been before. She had become a joyful, confident, energetic child. She called Cassie Mom, and not a day passed that she did not say she loved both her parents. And today, Cassie had news to share with Vincent. She placed a hand on her stomach, where a small life was beginning to form. She had known for 2 weeks, but she had not told anyone yet. She wanted to wait for the right moment. And tonight, when Vincent came home after a day of work, when Sophia was asleep in her room, she would tell him they were about to welcome a new member of the family. She imagined Vincent's face when he heard. She imagined his gray eyes lighting up with happiness. and she smiled. 3 years ago, she was a lonely, exhausted girl, standing on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, thinking about ending everything. She did not believe she deserved love. She did not believe she could ever be anyone's mother. She did not believe happiness was meant for someone like her. But then, on a stormy night, she heard a child crying in a dark alley, and instead of walking away, she stopped. She opened the door. She opened her heart, and that changed everything. True love does not ask who you are. It does not ask how much money you have in your account. It does not ask where you come from, or what your past looks like. True love asks only one question: are you willing to open your heart? Vincent opened his heart when he allowed a stranger to care for his daughter. Cassie opened her heart when she brought 2 strangers into her poor little apartment. And from that moment, from that small but courageous decision, an entire life was rewritten. The lesson this story wants to offer everyone is simple, but deeply meaningful. Kindness is never wasted. Giving does not make us poorer, it makes us richer. Even in the darkest nights, there is always light waiting, if we dare to look for it. Each of us, no matter what our past has been, deserves to be loved, and has the ability to love. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you do not miss the next moving videos. A like and a share from you will help this story reach more people. And who knows, it may spark hope for someone going through a difficult season of life. We would love to hear how you feel about Cassie and Vincent's story. Have you ever met someone who changed your life? Do you believe kindness can create miracles? Share your story in the comments below. We read every comment, and we truly value every word you share from the bottom of your heart. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We wish you and your family good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Remember, no matter how hard life becomes, there is always someone willing to open their heart to you. What matters is that you are willing to open your heart to receive it too. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.